Tonight's talk is based on a series of talks that I'm preparing actually for family camp next year. And the theme of the camp is the church in the third millennium. We're already 19 years into the third millennium, and we have to think in how the church, what is the position of the church in each millennium, because it's been different over history, throughout history. And I want to begin actually with a quote, which is really a general quote about spiritual understanding. This is from St. Gregory of Sinai, who was a 14th century father of the church. And he says, "You cannot be or become spiritually intelligent in the way that is natural to man in his pre-fallen state, unless you first attain purity and freedom from corruption." I'll paraphrase that. In other words, you cannot be intelligent spiritually like Adam was before the fall, because we have fallen nature. And I think this is something we need to really understand, because when we try to read something, read the gospel, even our prayer time, is that we're reading from fallen nature, not from spiritual nature, which we had, which was man had before the fall. This is very important, and you'll see what I mean when I start talking about the secularization of the church. In the first millennium, the church had to exist the same with pagan society. And also they had to deal with a lot of heresies in the first millennium. And in particular, a particular heresy which is still around today, Gnosticism, which is basically secret knowledge. And it's a mishmash, a collection of all sorts of ideas from the East, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, all mixed up with Christianity. And in fact, there are Gnostic Gospels written, the Gospel of St. Thomas, for example. And the church had to deal with this all the time. Well, the church dealt with it, fortunately, because we had great saints who could explain it. St. John Chrysostom, St. Photius, St. John Damascus, a whole list of saints that we are familiar with, our saints of our church, had to deal with these heresies. And so that disturbed the church greatly in the beginnings. Now, the church has to come to terms with the world around it. But we should not compromise what we believe because of society around us. And the early church certainly didn't. But you see, we have to understand that the church is not a religious institution. It's the body of Christ. It's mystical. It's a communion of human, divine. That's what the church is. So it's in time and outside of time at the same time, and cannot be affected by the world around it. We are affected. The church isn't. And when we think according to the church, then we too are not affected by whatever is surrounding us that is anti-Christian. The secularization of the church, having the world coming in and changing everything that belongs to the church and claiming it that this is what is true. In today's society, I'm jumping here to the third millennium, which we're in now, people want to make sense of the world around them. So they study sociology, psychology, theology, political history, philosophy, and all these things in order to try and make out, now, what is the meaning of life? What is how should society be? How should we live? We know already how we should live, because it is a spiritual thing, not a secular, intellectual thing. And so we have, by the grace of God, we have the fathers of the church who are timeless. They are not governed by the society around them. They had to live in it, of course, but they understood that the human nature is in a fallen state and it cannot be improved by secular means. People believe this, definitely believe that we have to have higher morals, and all of this can be done by, I don't know, let's think of it, by study, putting into practice what is moral. But in fact you can't, because we have fallen nature. We can only lead a moral, correct life because of the church, through the church. Outside of the church you can't. Of course there are good people in society, and there are people who have high morals, but they do not have a fulfillment of that, because they do not have spiritual intelligence. You do. Maybe not very well developed, me, us here in this room tonight, but we do have that gift of God that God has given us through baptism and through life in the church. The problem with fallen nature, which is behind all the good works in the world that people want to do, is that it is ruled by sensual pleasure and pain. I don't want to get too philosophical about this. I'm going to try and make this simple and understandable. We need to understand it. So the first millennium of the church is characterized by a fight against heresies, Gnosticism, this thirst for knowledge, and persecutions, of course. I mean, we read every day in the Millennium, or in the life as when we read the what's it called? Yes. The prologue. Sorry, I'm thinking of prologue. Lives of saints, there are martyrs every day. And the martyrdom was horrific, things that they suffered. This was the experience which characterized the first millennium and the church. Did the church suffer? No. Didn't. And we had great theologians that came to our rescue. And the important thing of faith of the early church was defined by the ecumenical councils, not by personal opinion, not by individual ideas, not even the saints. They had a consensus. There was a consensus between them. They don't all agree on certain matters, but our faith was united, and it was confirmed by ecumenical councils. And there was the spirit of martyrdom was a part of the first church right through the first millennium. The spirit of martyrdom, it is expressed not only in physical martyrdom, but in monasticism. That's what monasticism is all about. It's a form of martyrdom. And for us, it's a fasting. The ascetic life, prayer and fasting, this is a part of martyrdom. This is what we do when we fast. We're declaring our faith. The word martyr means witness. That's what it means in Greek. And so we are witnesses of our faith when we practice it. If we don't practice our faith, we are not witnesses. We're not martyrs. We're no different from the secular world around us. In fact, I think it's a worse situation, because we know the truth and we don't take any notice of it. The first millennium had the famous Cappadocian fathers of St. Basil, St. Gregory the theologian, St. Maximus, St. John of Damascus, Photius, a whole number of saints, okay, that we had as champions of orthodoxy. In the second millennium, we're moving forward now, the church, we had the development of hesychasm. This is silent prayer of the heart, the Jesus prayer. And it, again, was attacked by secular. Now, I'm talking about clergy and bishops. I'm not talking about the world outside. I'm talking about secular behavior inside the church. And the church had to fight against it's the people inside the church who did not understand the power of prayer, and certainly not of the internal prayer. And so they threatened to make the church secular. There was and I have a quote here, which is saying, well, not a quote, sorry, but a reference here. Emphasis on the horizontal, but not the vertical. Now, if you look at my cross here, the bar that goes across is a horizontal bar. Do you understand that? Horizontal. It represents the world in which, practical world in which we live. Eat, drink, sleep, move around. This is the horizontal. This bar in the center is the vertical part of the truth, which is the spirit. It points to heaven. So in our lives, we have to live in the world, and that's the horizontal level. And the vertical, the spiritual, is prayer, praechastia, and lifting us up to become saints. That's what it's about. So we have the vertical and we have the horizontal. Well, in the second millennium, the horizontal began to become more emphasis on that, on the practical needs of life instead of the spiritual, and to a degree that it began to threaten the church. Actually, this is the situation today as well. What I'm trying to come to tell you is that each millennium nothing has changed. It says in Ecclesiastes, nothing is new under the sun. It's all the old stuff, right? If you went back 1,000 years, you wouldn't see any difference. Spiritually, the church will be the same. We would fit in perfectly. So there's no development of the church or new ideas, because there's nothing to do with that. It's the world outside. Yeah, of course the world has new ideas. Fortunately it did, because we need advances in medicine. The discovery of penicillin is a lifesaver. That's a great gift from God. Technology. Every day I can read the gospel and the epistle and lives of saints on my phone. I think that's wonderful. Gift from God. But you can see how you use it is important. Okay, do we use it for vertical reasons, or do we use it horizontal? Yeah, Facebook, social media, whatever it is, chatting. People spend a lot of time looking at phones. They don't look at each other. I'm not accusing you of that, but I think it's something we need to be aware of. It's an attraction. Something's happening, my phone beeps and I want to know what's happening. I'm making prosper today for the altar, and have my phone on me in case somebody needs to call me, and there's a beep and I'm curious, and I have to say, no, I'll check it later, and I check later. It was, one of our boys actually, but what I'm saying is we become hostage to the phone. So now we're bringing the secular into our lives. And this is a danger, and this is something we need to think about seriously. Preoccupied with worldly matters. Second millennium was the development of scholasticism, which is that we can understand God rationally, which is not true. And so you have a whole movement in the Western Church in Catholicism, which scholasticism, trying to prove the existence of God, was a pursuit. In the East, we see God as revelation. In other words, you can't work out your belief logically. It doesn't work. Because it is a gift from God, it has to be a revelation. And this is the difference. For many people coming into orthodoxy, like myself, we grew up with a Western way of thinking, which was logical. Nothing wrong with it in a sense. But when you become orthodox, you suddenly realize there's a different basis, which is based on revelation. It's based on experience. This is the amazing thing. This is why we have the saints as examples, because they experienced God. They didn't read about God or study God and try and work it out logically. They experienced God. We know in the Old Testament, prophet Elisha, saw the presence of God. It was revelation. Moses, there's a whole lot of saints, and our contemporary saints as well. So this is how Orthodoxy differs from Western religions from Western thinking is because our faith is based on revelation, on experience, not on logical deduction. That doesn't mean to say that you can't use logic, but it's not the foundation of what we believe. In the second millennium, there was famous saints, St. Simeon the New Theologian, St. Gregory Palamas, with the Hesychast movement, Gregory of Sinai, which I quoted at the beginning here, and a movement called the Colivades movement, which I'll talk about that in another talk. The Colivades were a group of monks led by St. Macarius of Corinth, bishop, who in the 19th century, who revised the Jesus prayer and also the reading of the fathers, the Philokalia. In fact, they put it together. They collected the sayings of the Desert Fathers, the writings, they put them together in book form. First published in Greek, of course, then translated by St. Nicodemus, the Holy Mountain, and then translated into Slavonic, and translated in the Theological Academy in St. Petersburg. I told Kirill, I said, this is a famous place, this is where they translated the Philokalia, apart from saints that it's produced, as we know. So these things were a part of the second millennium. And if you remember, you may know that when St. Gregory Palamas had to defend orthodoxy against invasion from the Catholic Church, who argued that this is impossible to have this type of prayer and the idea of created and uncreated light. Again, I can't just talk about this now, it's too complex, but that was the movement, but the church has survived, and today we read the Philokalia, we have the Jesus prayer. What's changed? Nothing. Spiritually, nothing has changed. Horizontally, in the secular world, yes, many things have changed and have affected the church. Right now, we come to the third millennium, in which we are in. This is it. As I say, we're 19 years into it. And this millennium, the secular world around us, and this includes Western Christianity, is more concerned with worldly matters. There's a great movement to dismiss miracles. If you can't work it out logically, it can't exist. This has crept into the church, and it's also in Orthodox Church. The idea of miracles, the idea of trusting in God, that God can move a mountain. When we read that passage in the Gospel, we think, well, yeah, well, that's very interesting, but it's just a story. But it's not actually, because it's if we have faith which is a gift from God, we can do that. Can happen. We can do it. But when we read that passage, we think, well, I believe, but I couldn't possibly do that. That is our faith. But there is another faith with a capital F, which is a gift from God. And it comes to us when God wants to give it to us. Then it's a part of our education, spiritual education, spiritual intelligence. It's all there for each one of us here. All of us. No, say, well, that doesn't concern me. It's far too complicated. Nothing's complicated. If you trust God, and protect and be faithful to your orthodoxy. This applies to young people more than people like me, because you are the future of the church. And your challenges are much harder, I think, more difficult. But once we know what our faith is, we understand it, not intellectually, but in doing it. You know? If you practice your faith, people are affected by you because you are practicing it. It's no good talking to people about your faith, and you should never defend it. Don't get into arguments. If somebody asks you a genuine question because they're interested, answer. But if they want to have an argument, ignore it. Don't even think about it. Third millennium, in this, there is a great emphasis on sensual pleasure and pain. And this is a philosophy, again an ancient philosophy, which was a founder of it, and I've got a note here, 435 BC, hedonism, by Aristippus of Cyrenaeus, of Cyrene. He said that pleasure precedes moral rules. Now, the philosophy, now it was a Greek philosophy. It was to do with pleasure rather than pain. Now, does that seem unreasonable? Who wants to seek pain? No, we want pleasure. But this was a philosophy which today has now changed. It dominates every level of our lives. And hedonism goes right down to the simple idea when you go into the supermarket and somebody says, "Have a nice day. Have a nice time." This is what I mean, pursuit of pleasure. Is it bad? It's mindless. That's the problem. If you're serious about life and your faith, this sort of level of hedonism, everything has to be pleasure. Everything has to be fun. The whole of social media is full of that stuff. Do people come to our church and I stand at the door and I say, "Now what can I do for you? What would you like to have in church? Shall I get some guitars?" Because that's what it might give you pleasure. Out of the question, of course it is. But we have these rock churches, these big mega churches which entertain people. The liturgy is not entertainment. It's drama. Definitely drama is drama in the Greek sense of the word. Enacting something which is not only in the past but is also present because it's timeless, the liturgy. So we don't come to church to be entertained. We might be entertained afterwards. Certainly we have our cheerleader at church in the Trapezer. It gets everybody excited and sings and things. This is wonderful. I think it's great to get together and sing and social. But worship is not the same thing. It's not entertainment. So this is what I mean by hedonism. I'm sorry, there are a lot of technical terms here. And I've got a note here. Modern hedonism is nothing to do with philosophy, but it's self-indulgence. Because if you actually were a Greek and you were a hedonist, you would be very serious about life. It wouldn't be the pleasure that we seek today, where everything has to be entertainment. It's not like that. In fact, it's spiritual for them, for the pagan. It was a spiritual condition. If you didn't pursue pleasure, what were you pursuing? Evil, of course, hurting people, pain. So you pursue what is good and pleasurable and moral. That is philosophy. And for people who followed the philosophers like Aristippus, would not be allowed near him if they were immoral. They were very moral people. The strict rules with Socrates, Plato, you couldn't be a disciple or a student of them without leading an ascetic life. So they knew what had to happen, but they didn't have the revelation of the Holy Spirit. We call them righteous pagans. We recognize Plato and Socrates as righteous pagans. We don't recognize what they said necessarily because they're wrong. They got it wrong. But today, everything seems to be, it doesn't matter, whatever you think, whatever you want to do, that's it. And this is the problem that we have, the spirit of secularism, which is creeping into the church, in which, we have to be nice to people. No, you don't. But you shouldn't be rude to people. No, you have to stand for your faith. We have to preserve our faith. There are so many things here to discuss that I'm going to sort of bring it to a closure with saying that we have everything. There is if you want to rejuvenate orthodoxy, get it up to date, whatever that means, the answer is to dig deep, because it's there underground. We're standing on a gold mine. the gold mine. And we have to dig to find the gold. And when you dig into the teachings of the fathers and the Philokalia, then you realize that we have everything. We have everything. There's nothing new that we have to do. And so we had a council in this millennium, and there was a council in Crete in which they wanted to revise various things, and I don't know what happened to it actually. They call it holy, but I don't know how it could be holy when most of the Orthodox churches didn't recognize it anyway. So, this is, to me, this is sort of what I call Vaticanization of Orthodoxy. And I can talk about that some other time. I hope I don't get into trouble for that, but it's, yes, the secularization has crept into our bishops and into our priests and into people, and it begins to do with organization, fundraising. None of these things are wrong in themselves, but when they become the purpose of life, then there's something wrong. And then saying, well, what we do is not necessary. And the fathers are out of date. I read that somewhere. It's shocking. They didn't understand science. And I love that. That's one of my favorite topics, is that they didn't understand science. Oh, yes, they did. And they like St. John in Damascus, believed in centaurs. You know what a centaur is? Half man, half horse. That St. John of Damascus believed in that. Okay, I'm going to answer that in a minute. Who was the other one? Believed in dragons. Same one, yes, dragons. Do dragons exist? Well, actually they do, but if you understand it, if you have spiritual understanding, you realize it's demonic. Of course there were centaurs running around in the desert, because they were demons. Where did the Greek gods come from? They weren't something they read about. They've experienced them. Believe you me, they were there, the gods. They were the demons. And if you didn't do what you meant to do, they got you. I mean, I had a friend, I told you before, Hindu, went to the temple every month, offered fruit to the god. I don't know which god it was, demon. And I said, do you have to do this? Oh, yes, he said, I have to do it. If I don't do that, I'm in big trouble. They would get me. What sort of relation is that with your deity? Fear. And who is the god of the Hindus? Demons. So we have to guard against secularization of the church, which does concern you, everyone here, and in more so, secularization of you. That's far more important to recognize and say, right, if I want to be really orthodox, I've got to dig deep, not look outside and try and change things, and find the gold. And what is that gold? That is the teaching of the Holy Fathers of the Church. The gold, our gold, precious, is the liturgy. Are we going to change it, drop it, make it shorter? It's too long, too boring, it goes on for too long. Unless you're in the choir, and then you're occupied, but everybody else, and I'm busy. It's very boring, let's make it shorter. But that's a serious consideration that people have been thinking about, to change. Fasting, well, it's not sort of, we don't do that anymore in modern society. Yes, you do. There are more people fasting today in the secular world than in the church. Vegan. I'm saying vegan freaks, but there's always an exaggeration on these things. So yes, people fast. So the church has to reduce fasting, while the world outside is actually increasing it for the wrong reasons, which is demonic. These are demonic fasts, because where do the ideas come from? I'm going to, not going to, resist mosquitoes biting me because they need to have blood. This sort of crazy thinking is going around. Oh, climate change, well, let's not go down that road for the moment. All these things are not from the church, they are from the devil. There's only two entities in this world, all right? Then I'll finish on this. There's Christ and there's Satan. And the things of Satan are very deep, it says in Scripture. The deep things. Tavathia tu satana. the deep things of Satan, and that's what surrounds us now in the secular world. Do not let that secular world be you. Don't be a part of it. And you do not have to defend your faith, because God will defend you, and your patron saint will defend you.